All right, our next panel is on the evolution of leadership. Thank you, panelists, for coming up so promptly. We are going to walk through how leadership needs to or has already evolved over the last couple of years. We're going to look at DEI accountability within leadership and how we need to address the Great Resignation and the future of retention. This panel is moderated by Juno's own Sam Yanczak, Principal of Executive Search, and I will pass it over to the panel now to get us going. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jess. Thanks, everybody, for hanging in there. We know it's a long day. Very excited to be here with this incredible group of experts in the leadership space. They bring a lot of different insight, thoughts, and knowledge. So what I will do is I will open us up with a question, and I'll have each of them introduce themselves as we talk about the first question. What's on everybody's mind is, what do you think has changed most about leaders and leadership over the last 2.5 years?
Yes, I'm first. So I'm Robert Crowder, founder and managing partner of Chapman Farrell Group. Most people, the question that comes up is, since my name is neither Chapman nor Farrell, where does the name come from, since I'm the founder? And Chapman is actually the middle name of a grandfather that was a positive role model for me. As I was growing up, most of the men in my family were incarcerated for drugs or violence, and he was a positive role model for me. And Farrell is the name of the little town that I grew up in western Pennsylvania, which is a little steel town where there's not a whole lot good that comes out of there. So in starting the business, that's where the name comes from. So that's who I am. And the question was about leadership and what's changed or evolved. What I would say is that there are different facets of leadership that probably are more important based upon the timing or the context. And I would say that recently a couple of things seem to be a little bit more important. And I would say one of those things is being a cultural steward and being able to be a good cultural steward. And culture is really about behaviors and what's rewarded and what's punished. So there are certain behaviors today that need to be rewarded, and there are certain behaviors that need to be punished. And sometimes in those crucible moments, if you're not a good steward of culture, you're going to allow some behaviors to persist that really should not persist. So I think that that's one of those things around being a good cultural steward, that you have that authenticity, that you stand by it. I would say the second thing is this mindset about community and how important community is. And when I think about community, I think it's about the network of people, that fiber of people that we have in our lives. And as a human being, we are more interconnected than we realize. And so when you think about the fact that we can't accomplish anything of significance without somebody else and the help of somebody else, getting a leader that knows how to build community and expand the community and being able to do that through genuine generosity and kindness, nobody's going to trust you if it's all about you, if it's all about transaction. But finding a leader that knows how to lift up others, that knows how to give of themselves without expecting anything in return, somebody that is purely generous, somebody that is also curious in you and your well-being, those types of leaders inspire people to want to follow them. And if you don't have anybody that wants to follow you, you're not really a leader. So I would say that, that community builder and that mindset, realizing that everybody that you touch has an opportunity to impact you and others, and being that cultural beacon and being able to be authentic in that. So those are the two things that come to mind for me.
Well, thank you. I'll turn it over to you, Dave.
All right. Hi, I'm Dave Fechtman with Velocity Advisory Group. And, I was thinking through the most obvious response would be how the pandemic shaped remote working and hybrid working. That's clearly, but I also think the emergence of Gen Z in the workforce has been a huge factor. When you think about culture, I agree 100%. Culture, and I think the Great Resignation is putting a lot of emphasis on the importance of culture and is shaken out complacency. Organizations that don't prioritize culture, don't prioritize leadership development are falling behind pretty quickly. But I think obviously the hybrid leader is probably one of the most challenged leaders. I remember one of the earlier panelists talking about that work from home and work. I think you were bringing that up, which I think that's one of the hardest jobs on the planet right now, because leading a fully remote workforce takes a certain skill set, and leading a co-located workforce takes another skill set. Knowing how to pivot between the two is challenging. So I think the focus on results as opposed to activity, as opposed to monitoring attendance and meetings and those sorts of things, has been a major, major evolution, I think, in the last couple years. The last thing I'll say, and one of my favorite things about the last year and a half, are leaders focusing less on employee engagement and more on employee experience. And I think that's something, and I heard both panels talk about that this morning. We now, as business leaders, are responsible for creating that environment that your employees and future employees or teammates are wanting to be there. And it's an employee market. It's not an employer market anymore. So those are some of the things I think changed the most over the last 2.5 years.
Definitely. How about you, Phil?
Hi, I'm Phil Fountain with the Wharton Executive Education, and I have my own executive coaching firm. Some of the things I've been thinking about and talking to leaders about in the post-pandemic world of executive coaching is there's a requirement now for much more flexibility and adaptability in the way you lead. Because, historically we've had sort of a playbook by which, you could look forward and you could operate in the present and also look forward and anticipate the future. Whereas now, the future is uncertain. It's because of the changing nature of work, the changing requirements that employees have these days, which is much different than it was before. And so it requires a different mindset, a leadership mindset, to lead organizations today. It used to be CEOs and leaders were comfortable being able to go around their organizations and see people hard at work, and having vibrant conversations in the hallways, and it felt good. Whereas now, you don't necessarily have that because people are working at home, they're working wherever, and so it requires a mindset shift in order to create the kind of organization you want to have. And you have to. What I've been talking to people about is used to be that you would, it's you come to work for us, right? And now it's more like you come to work with us. And so those are some of my initial thoughts around, the leadership challenges and shifts that need to be made going forward.
I'm Lindsay Mareau. I'm the VP of Strategy for Phenom, which is a technology ecosystem that connects the interactions of candidates, recruiters, managers, and employees to drive engagement and personalization, all with our mission, which is to help 1 billion people find the right job. I love being in rooms full of people that also share in those values, right? So kudos to you guys. For us and from our perspective, I think that everyone in this room has known it for a while, but the success of HR is now the success of the organization. It's truly the lifeblood of whether a company is going to succeed or fail. And the time not just to lean on HR for advice or just for strategy when things might be needed, but really to make them stakeholders and partners and invest in those departments with technology that is founded on intelligence and data. Not only that, you have to make those investments and you have to invest in HR, which I think this department, probably more so than any departments at organizations, are tasked more than anything that they've ever been asked to do. And so investing in that technology not only helps with the success of the company, but in the well-being of probably the most important department within the organization. And so I think it's time not just to do 5% better, or use the same tech, the same process, and the same mentality, right? The same culture. in order to make small improvements, the time is now for big, massive, radical transformation.
I love that. And I think we're going to see that trend through the rest of this conversation. And I am going to start off with, how can we make that radical transformation happen as leaders? What do leaders need to be doing now that maybe we weren't doing in the past? I'll kick it off to you first, Dave.
Sure. Well, I love Phil's career. We also do executive coaching, and I think that a lot of executive leaders today tend to be our demographic from an age standpoint, and the workforce has changed so dramatically that they really do need to think differently. They need to prioritize culture. They need to prioritize diversity, equity, inclusion. They need to prioritize that emerging leaders mindset and understanding that the talent is within the ranks. So the future of leadership, I think, is going to be really, really interesting, and it's going on right now. So I think this commitment to professional development, this commitment to realizing that they have to pave the way for the people in their organizations that will be joining their organizations to be successful and not join their competitors. I think those are things that leadership is taking for granted for a really, really long time, and they can't any longer.
Mm-hmm. Agree. Anyone else want to chime in on that?
One of the things that I think is sometimes very big changes are exponential in how they wind up. So they start off small, but they have this exponential rise versus these transactional. And I think the thing that we need to start doing is stop thinking about being so transactional, but being relational in how we wind up building these communities that I was talking about. And even when it comes to diversity and inclusion, the reality is diversity and inclusion is really about diversity of thought. It's not just about people looking different or being a different gender. And sometimes in this advance to try to move this cause, we sometimes actually uninclude our white male brothers because they feel like the enemy, or they become villainized, when that isn't what it should be. It should be something that also includes them, and it really is about diversity of thought. But the other thing I would say is that looking around you, if everybody around you looks just like you, that doesn't happen by accident. Okay, that's an external expression of an internal state of mind. It's really, really hard to measure diversity of thought. It's a lot easier to measure what you see externally, and so it does work as a good proxy. So even though it is about diversity of thought, don't think that if everybody around you looks like you, that you can get away with that as an excuse. But the reality is, I think that what we need to do differently is, again, think about, when I think about my business, for instance, everybody that I touch is either a candidate, a client, or a source, a referral source, today or tomorrow. And as a result, everybody that I deal with has value. And as a result, I treat them as such. But if I just thought of people as a transaction, I might not have that same care. And I would say that one of the changes that leaders need to make, and it's one of those that just requires little different steps all along the way, but will have an exponential impact, is thinking about our relationships, this human fiber that we have, fabric that we have, and thinking about them as valuable relationships versus just purely transactions.
Definitely. I could not agree more. In the recruiting space, it's so easy to look at it from a transaction perspective, but shifting that mindset is so key. Lindsay, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, absolutely. And no surprise, I'll probably come at it from a little bit of the technology lens. But I think that making investments, not only from a technology standpoint, but from a culture standpoint, to really be the organization that wants everybody to learn and grow, not just leadership development, not just professional coaching at a certain level, but for every single employee at the organization. So I think there's ways that you can make sense of your own data and your own employee set to understand what can every employee be presented with, to understand what next steps they can take, and plans. Mentorship programs were mentioned, which I think is absolutely incredible. It's not just about, hey, here's some LMS coursework, or talk to your manager once a year and see if you're ready to take that next promotional opportunity, right? There's so many other things that we can be doing, but I think the critical step too that's so often missed, even for those organizations that see a need to do something different. They make the investment, but then there isn't the cultural and the executive leadership and sponsorship to actually support that change. Someone had mentioned on the last panel, and I'm sorry I forget who, that really resonated with me, is that, gosh, in this environment, there's probably leaders today that are so afraid to let go and promote that person that they have on their team, because how the heck are they going to backfill them? And if that's still a part of the culture, then there almost is no technology that can really make the changes that I think the desire is there. But the culture shift has to come with any type of other changes that are going to be made for it to really be successful.
Agreed. That's fantastic. Phil, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, just a couple other points. In the work that I do, in addition to the idea of leaders needing to be more flexible and adaptable, right? There's a few other things that come to mind. These days, it used to be that you could deliver results, right? Strong results moves you through the hierarchy of the organization. But when you get to a certain point, the skills that are required change. It's less about what my organization are delivering, and starts to become more focused on how I show up as a leader, how am I able to communicate and connect with people across the organization? And this is something that leaders sort of struggle with a lot, is this idea of vulnerability and the idea that I don't have to have all the answers. I've already demonstrated that I'm effective in getting results. And now, in this new broader role, I don't need to have all the answers. I can solicit the ideas of my talent to solve real problems. And it's not a weakness. It's actually, I spend a lot of time trying to convince leaders that vulnerability, having the courage to be vulnerable, is a strength. And it's sometimes hard for people to understand that, but lots of them eventually do, and it's a great thing. And the other thing is the notion of empathy, being able to, especially in this post-pandemic world where we have people with a whole range of types of things they're dealing with, to be able to connect with people in a different way and appreciate some of the things that are going on with them and their families, in their changes and how they orient to work, so that you can remain sort of contemporary and connected to your best talent.
I love that. I was just saying when we were chatting earlier this week to prepare for the panel that leaders are more vulnerable and more exposed since the pandemic. We've let folks into our homes, seen our pets, our kids, and it has changed, I think, the leadership role to be more human, and that's what our teams want. So I'm glad to hear that is resounding with your clients as well. I know we are probably close to time, but I would love to get everyone's thoughts on the responsibility for DEI within leadership. What role do we play as leaders on the topic of DEI, and how do we make sure that bleeds through the entire organization? Whoever wants to go first.
The white male on the panel. I actually was excited about this question, so you three didn't hop in. So I was with a client last week, a Fortune 500, and I was with their head of DE&I, and we were talking about this organization's goal is to increase people with diverse experiences and backgrounds 5% by 2025, which for this size of an organization, that's a big deal. It's a very big deal. And they already do well, in my opinion, but regardless, and we talked about really what is that going to require, because there are a few ways to accomplish that. You recruiters are one way. Let's import really talented people that bring diverse experience. But I think the other thing is really grooming your internal talent and creating programs and infrastructure and opportunities for people through the community to have opportunities for growth. And this organization, again, I feel has done well. the president of the organization is a Black female, so I think they've broken some barriers. But the programs that are designed for more emerging leaders, like our last panel talked about, and upskilling, are way behind. I mean, there's such a gap of where they need to be by 2025. I mean, that's going to be tomorrow. We're all going to blink and it's going to be 2025. So I think it's that really commitment to the development, mentoring. I heard about cross-functional opportunities, but there's a lot of work to be done, and it's within all of our own organizations, and it's and then of course recruiting top-notch talent. So yeah.
So what I would say, it probably goes back again to the culture aspect of it and the community aspect of it. So when I think about culture, all of us have biases. It's human to have biases, and that's not malicious. But what we need to do is figure out how do we eliminate some of the biases that we have, and some of that comes through familiarity. And so purposefully and leading by example, meeting with people and breaking bread with people that you don't normally break bread with over a meal, going and doing some community service, going to HopeWorks and getting engaged with a group of people that maybe you don't normally interact with. All of a sudden, they're less scary. You're more comfortable. You can ask questions that you didn't ask before. And as a leader, you can lead the way and demonstrate that through your behaviors. So you're modeling the behaviors that are acceptable. So that's one thing that you can do. And again, when you think about also from the community standpoint, do an inventory of what your community currently looks like. And again, if your community looks just like you need to do something about that. Take the initiative and purposefully expand your network and find other people to be able to interact with, people to engage with, people to be generous to and be kind to, because that's going to do something. And again, I think those two things are powerful ways that as leaders we can influence our own lives as well as those that we lead.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Phil.
I just wanted to echo, Dave and Robert's comments. I think they're right on point. And I'm not a D&I expert by any means. I have a perspective on it just from being in corporate America for a long time before coming in executive coaching. And, my view on it is that if you have a random distribution of people, right, 1,000 people, and you're trying to get the best talent available, it's unlikely that the talent that steps forward is all going to be the same. It just doesn't make any sense to me when you look at all the professions we have in the world and how diverse professions are. So what occurs to me is that we sometimes have a definition of what the best talent is. We want the right talent for our organization, right? And so it's easier for me as a leader. It's easier to have more or less a homogeneous team, isn't it? Because it's just easier. I don't have to work as hard to go cross cultures and cross nationalities and all that stuff. And it just makes my job as a leader much easier. So if I have the courage to accept that people are different, that they bring differences to the table, along with their talent, of course. And yeah, I might have to step it up a bit. I might have to work harder to make everyone on my team feel included. Then that's part of my job. And so, so if we could get to the point where we're just focused on the best and redefining what the best is, I think that's a way, in my own opinion, to start taking steps forward in the DE&I space.
Great. With the Great Resignation very much still in effect, I see it day in and day out from the recruiting world, what do you think leaders can do to mitigate, where possible, that happening within their organization in how they treat their people and how they lead the organization from the top down?
Being the recruiter in the bunch here, most people leave their boss, not necessarily the job. Mm-hmm. So being a better leader, it's going to help.
Yeah. I mean, I would also say that recruitment and retention are two sides of the exact same coin. And the way that you treat people and the experiences that you serve up along every step of that journey is so important to not only finding the right person, but really making that person excited to stay and be a part of that journey that is being a new employee. And that experience, by the way, doesn't start with hire. It in fact starts with hello, right? I know we talked a lot about that in the last panel, but it's not just about showing like what a potentially great diverse employer you could be, although I can't tell you the amount of people, and I get to interact with, you know, top leaders from Fortune 500 companies each and every day. And the amount of times that we get asked about helping them with their diversity metrics, but then when you do the research and you go on to the current site and you see the absolute lack of real investment in goals, cultural change, and the actions, there's no technology that can support that can fix your diversity problem, right? So fixing the house that you're in and really investing in the employees that you have, but understanding that the experience and the story that you tell starts long before recruiters even start to interact with your potential candidates.
Awesome. I love that. Dave, Phil, anything from your perspective when it comes to the clients that you're working with, how they can best help this?
Well, I love the Great Resignation. It's been really good for velocity, but not for the most obvious reasons. It's shaken complacency. I said this a little earlier. It's shaken complacency out of the workforce. So organizations are very focused on talent retention through culture, through leadership development. So thank you, Great Resignation. But I think that one of the things that, we talked about the importance of leadership, but empowering people with different backgrounds, different functions in your organization to form something like a cultural advisory board, to have some of these other things that are actually more bottom up as opposed to top down. I think those are things that organizations are beginning to prioritize now, which is fantastic, to really bring in different perspectives and for peer-to-peer influence of sticking around, peer-to-peer influence of skill development, what's broken, what's working. That's just a great advancement, and we're starting to see those sorts of things happening more and more since October of last year.
That's wonderful. As we approach time, I would love to give each of the panelists a moment to share their last words of wisdom or advice for current leaders, aspiring leaders, folks in their organizations that consider themselves as leaders in closing. So Phil, I'll start with you.
Yeah, the good news is I work with leaders at all levels, so I can appreciate the challenges that leaders have, early in the leadership pipeline as well as those who are nearing the top. And what we often talk about is when I aspire to go higher, and most people do, oftentimes they don't have a focused development intervention that prepares them for the next level, right? So, they've delivered results, they've done really well in all aspects of their role, and when an opportunity comes to promote them to the next level, sometimes leaders are ill-equipped because they don't understand the behaviors and the sort of skill sets they need to have at the next level. So they struggle in the first year, just trying to get their sea legs and understand what's required of them. And so my voice to some of the mid-career and earlier clients is that you want to begin to adopt those behaviors at the next level before the organization thinks about promoting you, because they want to see you at the next level behaviorally now, so that you can make that turn, make that transition, and begin along the next pathway in a lot smoother way. Don't wait, learn now is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Dave?
We were talking about the hiring managers in the last panel or two panels ago. I don't remember which one it was, but I find that most leaders actually are not just willing to be vulnerable, but also willing to learn more than their persona projects. So we do a thing, and we'll ask a leader, where do you want to grow the most? And one of them is, help me identify my blind spots. And most leaders are very open to understand that they do have blind spots, and I think that's all of our jobs as recruiters and all of our jobs as leader influencers to help them in a safe way do something about those, bring them to the forefront, but also help them do something about a blind spot.
That's great. Thanks so much. Lindsay, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, perfect. I just feel so grateful to be a part of this day. I've been taking notes feverishly all morning from the rest of the speakers. To me, I think what really stands out, and I'll just go back to radical change. Radical things have happened to each and every one of us in the last 2 years, and doing things using the same process, the same technology, and the same way of thinking culturally, and just improving that by 3 to 5% is just simply no longer going to keep people, and it's not going to get you the right people either. So it's really time for radical change that takes, I think, courage, vulnerability, love that, and I think the grit to know that it's not there is no such thing as a short-term fix, right? Like thinking about all of this from a long haul perspective.
That's great. Thanks so much. And Robert, close us out.
Oh, okay. So I would say, as a leader, and thinking about it, is the higher up you go, the less it is about you and the more it is about others. And realizing that your job, the higher up you go, is about making other people great. Other people excel, other people better, and they're better because of the type of leadership that you provide. So I would say that as you're thinking about, as you grow through an organization, it becomes more about others than about yourself, the higher up you go, and how do I pull all these pieces together that it creates more value than, I create more value than all these individual pieces separate.
Thanks so much, everyone. Give a round of applause for this great group.